It's my pleasure today to introduce a good friend and colleague of mine. He currently works as a data scientist for the University of Michigan, and he has a background in computer science and a master's in sociology. If you haven't checked out a podcast episode that we had previously, we actually recorded an audio file of his personal journey with his family back to Toledo, Ohio. I think it's definitely worth a visit if you haven't checked that out before. We're going to be talking just a little bit about the impact of the coronavirus on a very human and social cultural level. Thank you today for joining me today, Victor. It's great to have you in.
Yeah. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, so I guess we can just jump right into it and talk about something that I've been really curious about for a while, which is the concept of freedom. I think freedom in today's, the way that we think about freedom, of course, is an integral value of American society and the way that we think of the United States as a community founded under that premise. What are your thoughts today as we think about freedom in terms of a pandemic, in terms of a crisis? Does that change our views of freedom? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think it's a really complicated issue, right? Because I mean, we do value freedom, and I think that that's one of the things that makes our country dynamic, right? It's one
Right.
of the things that makes it special, if you will. But at the same time, it's like this pandemic is forcing us to think about it in different ways, right?
Right.
So if you say I'm free to do whatever I want to do, so let's think of like freedom of movement in this time. It's like that is now something that can be potentially deadly,
Right.
right? And so now you have a situation where your concept of freedom or the way that we look at freedom, it seems like at the minimum, we kind of have to revisit it, right? Because just pure unbridled freedom in this situation could lead to actually increasing deaths.
Right.
And I think one of the other things I always like to think about is the other side of the equation, right?
Right.
We have these rights, but what are some of the responsibilities that come with this freedom and these rights that we have?
Yeah.
So I think as we kind of see, it's a lot of we're kind of as a collective, we're kind of struggling with that right now,
Okay.
struggling to kind of determine the scary part is time is of the essence.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
When you say struggle, can you elaborate a little bit more on your thoughts today as we think about freedom and in ways that we're struggling as a community and what we can perhaps do to maybe change the way we think about freedom in this country?
yeah, I mean, I think we're struggling. I mean, when we hear some of the stories, I mean, some states, still, don't have stay-at-home orders.
Right.
Even states where they do, I mean, you have, people that, might not be following those. And I mean, of course, I mean, we understand. I mean, there's certain instances, where you might not be able to, stay at home. I mean, if you have
Right.
medical issues, I think even from an economic perspective, I mean, how much money do you have saved up? If you don't work, maybe you can't eat.
Yeah.
I mean, so we all kind of know that there are these situations that really kind of stress people just in terms of, survival. But, then a lot of the, I don't know what word I want to use, but a lot of the not following, these recommendations or orders is just by choice,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Again, go back to rights. I have the right to do it.
Right, right. Yeah, I
Yeah,
think
yeah.
as a concept, freedom, I think oftentimes is associated with independence and
Hmm.
individualism.
Hmm.
I think freedom or liberty in that term, perhaps in a different context, in not a American context, does not
Hmm.
necessarily associate itself with those terms. Is that something correct in thinking that freedom is associated with those words, or is that something that perhaps we should change?
Well, so I think one of the things you talked about is like my background in sociology. So, one of the things I'm always looking at is the collective. And I think again, I mean, it's a tough thing, but I think that we have to when we talk about freedom, one of the things I kind of think is that maybe freedom is discipline, right?
Right.
I kind of give the idea of a sports analogy, right? You see a sports player do something that's amazing,
Right.
and it's like, man, how are they so free to be able to move like that, or make that split second decision? But when you really think about it, that freedom comes from discipline, right? It's
Right.
because they have a regime. It's because they they work out, it's because they get enough rest. It's because, they spent years and years working on their craft, right?
Right, right.
And so I think the beauty part of freedom, often comes out when it is tempered by, some kind of discipline. Here we're talking about freedom in the sense that, yeah, you do have these rights, and these rights are a beautiful thing, but, what is the point of a freedom, that doesn't take into consideration, the collective, right?
Right, right.
What is the point of a freedom that, lets you do things that may or may not benefit you, but hurt others?
Right.
And so I think the big question is, well, what is something that we can all agree on, right? I think one thing that we could get broad agreements is, that freedom should be life affirming, right?
Hmm.
It should promote life. It should, give people, the opportunity to live, safely and healthily.
Hmm.
And so I think this kind of view of freedom as something disciplined that, opens things up more for the collective is probably the kind of concept that, we should move toward.
You're speaking of the collective. That
Mm.
certainly is in perhaps a more socialist community where the thinking, or whatever term you want to use, they're thinking
Yeah.
in a more collective form. And I give the example of the Korean government or the Japanese government, in which there's a very centralized government that's thinking about the public. And if you look at a place like Taiwan, which is where I'm from, there's a sense that
Mm.
I have to take care of being a part of this larger community. So you see buy-in from all the way from the private level to the home level. So there's essential kind of a pride, but also a realization that they're all part of the collective, and that is
Mm.
able to enable a lot of these more centralized governments to create the policies that are in place right now in response to COVID-19. I think it's very different in the United
Mhm.
States. I don't think it's about which one is better or not. There's certainly qualities and aspects of both that challenge one conception of freedom.
Again, like I said, it's tough, but yeah, I mean, you look at so let's just look at this situation first, right?
Yeah, yeah,
One of the words that you kept hearing come out in the context of many Asian countries and them dealing with the pandemic
right.
was the term draconian measures,
Okay,
right?
yep, yep.
Like everything was draconian. Oh, we would never do this in the United States because it's draconian.
Right,
We couldn't do this because this would be draconian in terms of our civil liberties and things like that, right?
right.
But then you started seeing a shift where it was like, well, if we don't do these things, if we don't do these things, we're going to be like Italy, right? That
Yes.
was the first kind of salvo. It's like, okay, the fear of becoming like Italy. Then it's like, oh well, we're already on, the Italy curve, and then it's like, oh, maybe our curve is going to be even worse than Italy.
Yeah.
And so, then you start seeing discussion and debate around all of these quote unquote draconian measures, right?
Right.
And so I think, one of the things we have to kind of begin to understand is that to subsume the individual for the collective is not something that should be always considered draconian,
Right.
right? Sometimes subsuming the individual for the collective is not only morally sound, is not only the best thing for the situation. I think it's just something that a person should know how to do.
I'm thinking on a political scale and political level, how we become even more divisive politically as a nation.
Yeah.
But when talking about COVID-19, I think suddenly you see that those divisions almost don't matter. How does this affect politics? How does this affect the way that we see the
I
world?
think, the big question, for us is when this is over, will we remember?
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, when you look at politics or partisanship, I mean, I mean, to some degree, it almost feels like it's almost disappeared to some degree. I mean,
Yeah.
clearly it's still there,
Yeah.
but in terms of just looking at Governor DeWine, Governor Cuomo, like I don't think anybody is thinking like, oh, this is a great Republican,
Right.
speech today, or I think the thing that's kind of become clear is that, and even when you look at the response, there's some Democratic governors that maybe their response hasn't been so good, and Republican governors, the response maybe wasn't so good. And then, you know, it hasn't there hasn't been any clear distinguishing along partisan lines.
Yeah.
I think what's come to the fore is, people of character,
Yeah.
right?
Yep.
What is a person's character? What is their capacity to lead? How humane are they?
Yeah. I mean, I think, having studied, disaster policy as well, it seems that human beings, and not just Americans but human beings in general,
Yeah,
are short-sighted until
yeah,
something hits them in their face when they experience
yeah,
crises. So I mean, I definitely think that in terms of preparedness, but in terms of our mindset as a collective, how can we really be prepared for crises before they even surface? And I think that level of preparation and our understanding of the world is perhaps something that it's not colored by
yeah,
red or blue. It's something that on a
right.
very human, community level, that we can come together and realize life is what's leading this country and what should lead this country. And
Yeah, no, I mean, I definitely agree. I mean, I think the big question is, how do we maintain that energy, like you said, in times where we don't have a crisis?
yeah,
I think, I don't know, I think it's just steady work,
yeah,
right?
yeah,
I think, yeah, it's not, it's almost, and I think memory, right? I think memory is a huge thing. I think about, like, in my lifetime, I mean, so, there's the COVID crisis,
yeah,
there's 9/11, there's the Great Recession, there is, Columbine, there's Sandy Hook, and these are just,
yeah,
examples,
yeah,
right?
yeah,
And so I think, when you say that at first, it's like, oh, well, that's kind of a depressing list. Like, lots of other things have happened. We've gone from dial-up internet to 5G. I mean, so,
right, right,
yeah, yeah. So, I mean, it's not all doom and gloom, but, these things are unique in the sense that there are times where we've come together, right?
yes,
And
yes,
and so I think memory as an inspiration, I think is another thing that is very important. Not allowing us to, forget, these occurrences, these stories, because you think even in this situation, like, there's so many stories happening all over the world right
yeah,
now.
yeah,
Like, I mean, from an art perspective, like, you wonder, and I know it's even privileged to be able to kind of think about this, but I mean, I think art is, if we're talking about making a change, we're talking about long term. I mean, art is a vehicle,
yeah,
right? And so you wonder the stories that will come out of this and how those will inspire people.
yeah,
And so I think memory, a social memory, a political memory, a memory of compassion. How do we kind of memorialize these things in the culture, in a way that makes us say, okay, we're not going to forget this story, and because these things have happened,
right.
you know, this is the kind of, country we want to live in. This is the kind of, world we want to live in.
Yes, yes, absolutely. I think that when we think about the political divide in our country and these crises that almost force us to come together as a nation, I think it's a very powerful story in it by itself. And hopefully, we can learn from these lessons that actually the true power of the United States, the true power is that we're able to come together and solve problems and to really come together to see these things through. And actually, your background in computer science, talking about, I
Mm.
think that also perhaps is something that's at the core of people's thoughts at this point in time, and especially in moments of crises as it deals with technology and that intersection where
Mm.
you see people giving up their rights to privacy in these
Mm.
moments, and they're enabling their government to come in. And you saw that as well after 9/11. Basically,
Mhm.
those policies come out. What are your personal thoughts on what we should do as a collective in terms of in given these kind of situations? And just to give the audience
Yeah.
and viewers some background, essentially they're developing these mobile trackers that are able
Mhm.
to track individuals in quarantine. But yeah, I don't know what your thoughts, your personal thoughts are in terms of privacy in that area of technology.
Yeah, again, complicated area, but I mean, I think a few things. One, usually the argument that I hear, against giving up privacy, even in times like this, where it could be beneficial to the collective, is the slippery slope argument,
Yeah.
right?
Yep.
So, oh, I give up this right today,
What's tomorrow gonna be,
tomorrow,
right?
yeah, tomorrow the government is, sleeping in the bed next to me at night, and it was, and it's like, uh, that is a risk, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm not, it sounds funny, but I don't want to, um, act like there's nothing to that argument. There is that potential anytime, citizens, anytime, members of a country give up rights, that they will continue to be eroded.
Yeah.
Um, I think the more pragmatic approach, though, is to and the challenge with this approach is more of a burden on us, right?
Yeah.
But the approach of continuing to take it by situation,
Yeah.
right? Each situation is kind of unique. I don't think anybody is writing a blank privacy check to the government. I don't think anybody is saying that.
I think it's pretty much okay to say that the United States
Yeah,
is the epicenter of COVID-19, and I think that's unfortunate. That about
yeah.
2 months, a month and a half ago, I had conversations with my friends, and they're looking at Wuhan, China, and saying that's a foreign infection. It's never going to come to the United States, and they're almost downplaying the severity.
I mean, I think one of the things you talked about, that sense, pervasive sense, like throughout the society, that um, it wasn't going to come here, right? It was a as if you know as if a virus like respects nation state boundaries, or something like that. And to some degree, I think this is kind of this idea of American exceptionalism,
Yeah.
right? And most of the time when people talk about American exceptionalism, they talk about it, from a negative perspective. This idea of feeling better than.
Yeah.
Um, but I don't want to lose that, right? I think it's good to want to be exceptional. The question is, like, exceptional at what? So
Yeah.
you can imagine a alternate universe where we took it more seriously, and we decided we were going to be exceptional at making sure this thing didn't get out of hand,
Yep.
right? And so I think we should continue to try and be exceptional, but I think do so in a more humble manner,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
I think really this is the question that we have to ask, is that if we're going to continue to think this, then what is the actual content? I think another thing that's been interesting is this, like, there's been all this talk, this presidential cycle of socialism.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, you know, almost as like it's almost like a referendum on whether socialism is American or un-American.
Right.
Um, and the weird thing is that, so one of the first responses to these situations, this situation, was socialism, right?
Yeah.
We're going to mail out a check, a certain amount of money to all American families.
Yeah.
Like, that is not letting the market play out. It's not, right.
Yeah.
I guess people would say, well, oh yeah, it wasn't called socialism, it wasn't branded that, and I guess it was socialism as a tool, right?
Sure.
But I think that uh, even in that, I think there's a lesson. I mean, I think with all of the situations that we've been experiencing, I think this is going to be something that we will start talking about more.
And that's
Is
like
that yeah,
that's like what we're talking about in terms of the lines kind of being a little blurred in this situation, right?
exactly,
Yeah. Just a little bit about you personally in this
yeah,
situation, and you and your family, and we've covered your story before, and the reason why you came to Toledo, Ohio, of all places in the United States, is very specific, and it's very meaningful to you and your family. How does this situation affect how you guys are experiencing in terms of hospital care, on the ground here in Toledo, and what does that mean to you and your family?
personally, that is an aspect of everything that has been really scary,
Yes.
because as our daughter has sickle cell, She's been lucky enough to kind of have a milder, case.
Yeah.
But what this all means is that sometimes she definitely needs access, to not just hospital, but a hospital, skilled in caring for people with sickle cell,
Right.
right? And so it's like this is kind of the other side of the medical system being overwhelmed.
Yep.
Not just that it's overwhelmed with COVID patients, which I mean that alone is horrible.
Yeah.
But the fact that people who have other conditions or other things might not have access.
Right.
So my daughter, she also has a lot of allergies. So like
Yeah.
we had an incident where she ate something and her cheeks swelled up,
Oh, okay.
and we gave her something, um, uh, but when we called, they said, "Oh well, I think you should probably give her EpiPen and bring her in." And so it's like,
Yeah.
we have to think, well, yeah, we could, but then her immune system is a little more sensitive because she
Yes.
has sickle cell.
Yes.
And so, is this taking her to go and get COVID basically?
Yeah. Yeah.
And then and then it's like we don't really know. There's not much information on how sickle cell and COVID interact,
Yes.
right?
Right.
So it's like all of these. It just makes you realize how much you take for granted on an everyday basis.
Yeah. Is this, personally speaking for yourself? I mean, is this a time of anxiety for your family, or, is there is there hope on the horizon, or what are your thoughts on this? I mean,
Yeah, I mean, so I think there's definitely anxiety,
yeah.
but I think the anxiety is a bit drowned out by hope.
Yeah.
Um, some of that is just because I've been lucky
Yeah.
or blessed. I mean,
Yeah.
so some of it is factors out of my control to some degree, and some of it is just because you know whatever's going to happen. I mean, the thing is that we have right now, right? We can like spend this hour just being anxious,
Yeah.
or we can spend this hour together. We
Yep.
can spend this hour talking.
Yep.
We can spend this hour being thankful that we have this hour.
Yes.
Um, and so I think that it's almost a situation is like when you really look at it clearly, um, it's only so anxious that I guess you should probably allow yourself to be.
Yeah.
If because like I said, I mean, you just don't know. But what you do know is that, like I said, you have now. So, I think if you take it as, what do I do in this now? I think it kind of eases the anxiety a bit.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that. We all have a now, and we're responsible
Yeah,
for now, and we're responsible for what happens as a result of our now.
yeah.
And I think that as a community member, as a citizen in the United States, I think we all, rely on that hope that tomorrow will be better, but that is determined by our now.
It's something that's really simple, and it's just that, we're humans,
Yeah.
right? We're humans, and so as humans, we can choose to, do things in a humane manner, right? We can choose to put our humanity first. And I think if we put that first, right? If we put that first in our day to day, if we put that first in our decision making, um, I think that we'll be better prepared
Yeah.
in general,
Yeah.
right? And so it's a kind of loose guidance, but then you think about it a little deeper, and it's really the only guidance that we need.
Yeah.
Um, because I mean, I think that is our core thing. How do we develop, a society, a way of living, way of thinking, a way of being that is just more centered around this concept of, you know, humanity, human dignity, for all.
Yeah.
Um, and so I think that starts again with putting the humanity first in everything that we're doing.
Yeah. Humanity first. I think that is the key for all this. Well, thank you so much for joining us here today, Victor.
Oh man, thank you. Thank you for having me.
Well, I hope you enjoyed that conversation with me today. As much as today's COVID-19 is dealing with the science and the healthcare aspect, it is also a human issue, and that requires us to be responsible citizens to be a part of that solution. I think there was a lot to be unpacked in that conversation today with Victor, and I hope that if you like this, give us a like, give us a share, comment below. I think this will be a really good opportunity for us to revisit and reconsider this time that we're in, and hopefully it can bring up more conversations in the future. Thank you so much for joining us today. I'll see you soon.